New reporting indicates that short-term rentals are actually outnumbering the number of long-term apartments for rent in New York. And we're specifically talking about New York City and all of its boroughs. New studies indicate that, well, inventory of rental apartments in all of Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Northwest Queens in April was just 7,669. The number of entire apartment and entire home Airbnb rentals available in New York City right now is 10,572. And that's according to analysis that was done by AirDNA, a third-party site that tracks short-term rentals. So this is not at all surprising, especially when you consider that landlords might reconsider long-term rentals when they could actually make a lot more money by doing short-term rentals, and that's exactly what's happening right now. The net effective median rent in Manhattan, by the way, went up year over year to a new high, $3,925 at the largest rate on record, and listing inventory had the most significant annual decline on record. So there was already a housing shortage. I mean, it's a long-running issue in New York. There's no mistake about it, even before Airbnb was around. But after Airbnb and some of these other short-term rental apps came out, it became a lot worse. And New York is not the only place people are experiencing this. I wanna get to some videos showing what happened to Joshua Tree, California in just a minute, because it's telling and it shows you, again, doesn't matter if it's a big city or a small town, these short-term rentals are having a negative impact.
So I lived in New York here. I grew up in New Jersey and then I went to law school in New York and so lived there for 3 years. And I don't know any friend, and I used to have a lot of friends who lived in New York, who remains in New York, other than one guy who worked in finance. Everyone else is gone because it's absolutely impossible to afford the apartments. I mean, look, I just did the math on it. You're not supposed to spend more than 30% of your income on housing. And so based on the average Manhattan apartment that they just explained there, and it was that Manhattan? Yeah, Manhattan. That comes out to you need to have a salary of $160,000 to afford the average apartment in Manhattan.
It's crazy.
$160,000 a year, and that gets you to your max of 30% that you should be spending. Who has that kind of money? How can an average worker in New York working at a deli or working in construction, et cetera, have $160,000 a year just to be able to afford rent in an average apartment?
Average apartment. So I want to get to these videos I came across regarding Joshua Tree. Joshua Tree is a wonderful place in California near a national park called Joshua Tree National Park. But they're having an issue with these short-term rentals as well. Let's take a look at the first video.
I stumbled upon a corporation out of Chicago that owns 100 Airbnbs in Joshua Tree, 100. I don't understand how we have these neighborhoods that are zoned residential that are full commercial properties at this juncture. I don't get it, it's weird.
There's no limits, they can do whatever they want, and now the costs of that are starting to be felt in the business community. Right now we're hitting the wall, there's not enough, not everyone can succeed with the amount of workforce there is here. We're all competing for the same people, and it's stymieing new businesses. And I'm afraid a lot of businesses are not gonna make it. They're not gonna be able to do it. It just makes running a business really hard.
So why does it make it so difficult to run a business? Cenk, you actually had some experience with this when you went to Wyoming, I think,
yes.
Right? It's because the workers in the area, the people who have actually grown up and lived in that community can no longer afford the housing because they've been squeezed out, and landlords end up selling to corporations that then turn around and they don't flip the houses. They don't, what they end up doing is using those properties for short-term rentals instead of long-term rentals.
Yeah, so we went to Wyoming, there's Yellowstone, Grand Teton there, and then there's Jackson Hole, which is a fancy place. And so they don't like the riffraff there. So the housing prices are sky high. And so you know what happened? We couldn't get a meal, because the restaurants were open only for a couple of hours. There was a gigantic line at McDonald's, which is the only place open. Why? Because no one could afford to live there, and you'd have to drive literally hours to get there if you want to work there. So they just didn't have enough staff. They didn't have waiters, they didn't have, it was unbelievable. And then we went whitewater rafting, and then we asked the woman that was doing that, I said, what are you doing? She's like, oh, we all sleep in our cars. That's the parking lot. We all go to, all the workers, and we sleep in our cars, and we do it for the summer for cash, and then we have to leave because no one can afford any apartments here. And guys, zoning is super important because sometimes you say, well, all right, well, we'll put 6 people in a room. And then they say, no. We don't want any commoners here. So they will outlaw multiple people living in a same apartment under zoning laws. And that brings us back to this housing issue. Because if a small business tries to go to a residential area and set up shop, if my wife, who's a therapist, for example, set up a therapist office, man, they would rain down holy hell on her. And they say, oh no, that is not zoned for that. But the biggest corporations in the world are buying all over residential zoning areas, and nobody's saying anything. So big businesses aren't just crushing their workers, they're also crushing their competition, small businesses. So, and all of this is happening, and politicians don't do anything about it, because who do they get funded by? Giant corporations.
And look, there are parts of the country where they've outlawed, the short-term rentals. Palm Springs is a good example. So if you're trying to get an Airbnb or Verbo, whatever, one of those short-term rental services in Palm Springs, it ain't gonna happen. And I think that's the right way to go. There are neighboring areas where you can get an Airbnb, but the way they did that, I think, makes sense because Palm Springs is still. People are still hustling there. Like the businesses are doing pretty well, you compare Palm Springs to other parts of California and it's honestly night and day. And I think it's because they're more protective of their community there. And they won't allow some of the predators to come in for their own profit motives. One more video because I think it's important to hear from the workers in Joshua Tree specifically.
Our landlord is selling our property. Having people come in and look at the house that I've been living at for the past couple years is pretty annoying. I don't recognize any of the people coming in. They all look like investors. They definitely want to Airbnb it, and it just doesn't seem fair.
Some of my employees have had their houses bought out from underneath them to become short-term rentals, some of them illegal short-term rentals.
I have one full-time employee who is engaged, pregnant, and has been trying to find housing for her and her fiance for 6 months now.
What we really need here is a bigger work pool, and what we need to get that is housing. I have several employees right now who are in complete danger of losing the housing they have, and I have several others who've recently lost long-term rentals that have been sold and are becoming vacation rentals.
So this activity, again, impacts every community across the country. We're seeing it all over the place. Joshua Tree, small town in California, same experience that people living in New York are now experiencing as a result of the limited housing inventory and big corporations coming in to scoop everything up.
Yeah, and one last thing here, guys. I'm also a little guilty too. We're always honest with you guys. Guilty in the sense of I like Airbnbs and I like staying at them. Okay, and in fact, there's this town, a little area in LA called Manhattan Beach that I really like. And I found out recently that they don't have Airbnbs, and I was like, damn it. And then I was like, no, you know what? Good for them.
Yeah.
And that's my point to you guys. Even if you enjoy some of the things, if it's hurting the local community, don't do it, right? So, or at least respect their decisions. If they want to do it and they're okay with it, great. But if they don't want to do it, understand that there's a good reason why they don't want to do it. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.